I basically worked out that a 3-bedroom house was cheaper than a 1-bedroom unit. I then worked out 2 years later how I could use the equity in there to get a free Porsche.
Chris Gray is an independent property expert.
He has a property portfolio worth over $15 million.
You're losing weight, or you're trying to get fit, or you're trying to get wealthy. It takes change, and that change is uncomfortable.
Kosan Road during the day versus at night is just like a property deal. By day, it's quiet, relaxed, and easy to assess. By night, it's chaotic, noisy, and full of distractions. Always assess it in the cold light of day, not under pressure.
I think there's a new dream now. It's own multiple homes but never live in them, and go and rent where you want to live.
He says owning your own home is overrated, and it's time Australia followed the lead of Europe and Asia, where renting is a way of life.
Chris, is the idea of owning an Australian home or the Australian dream, is that over?
I think there's a new dream now. It's own multiple homes but never live in them, and go and rent where you want to live. So that's the difference, is rather than having the one that you actually physically live in, now it's having multiples but you live somewhere else.
Yeah,
it's
right.
the backdrop for if people can see the view.
I love that.
Where did the idea of the Australian dream and the hustle for us all to get into a home, where did that come from?
Oh, look, I think it's most places around the world. I know there's some European countries where they still rent. Most of the nation rents and property prices don't really go up. But coming from the UK, and I guess most of the convicts from Australia did come from the UK originally, then it's just been bred into us for hundreds and hundreds of years that rent money's dead money, and so you should buy your own home. And it's the biggest wealth creation thing. So for most people on retirement, no matter what they earn during their lifetime, generally their family home is the major thing that creates the wealth for retirement.
So it's interesting you say that. The idea of rent vesting is, I guess, what you're talking about here. That's the new dream,
That's the new
so to
thing
speak.
over the last 10 years or so, yeah.
Yeah. Can you explain the concept? What is rent vesting, and why does it seem to work so well for people?
Sure. So the whole idea is if you buy lots of, say if you're in Sydney, lots of little 1 or 2 bedroom units in like a Coogee or a Bondi or a Manly or something like that at $1 or $2 million, you've seen all the pictures on TV in the middle of summer. There's a queue of 50 or 100 people trying to rent them and outbid each other. And so the rent on those is typically reasonably high. It's say 3.5 to 4.5, maybe 5% of the property value. So that basically means $1 million property at $1,000 a week is roughly 5%. Whereas if you then live in a $5 or $10 million home, say like the place we're in at the moment, not many people can afford to pay for those things. And so it doesn't get that much rent. And the people that can afford to rent these things don't want to, because typically poor people rent. And so the rent price goes down. So typically on a $5 or $10 million property, you might only pay 1 or 2% rent. And so that's the arbitrage effectively. So say if you live in a $1 or $2 million unit, and then you were going to sell that and go and buy a $3 or $4 million home, instead of doing that, you could then just go and buy another unit and then use the rent on those two to then rent a $5 or $6 million property.
What are your thoughts on townhouses and those kinds of properties? Do you see them as appealing, or? So
everything's appealing in the right place, in the right kind of area. So typically when we're investing, we buy what the median price buys you in that area. So in Sydney, typically that's a unit, that's what most people live in. And for the median price, which is around, say, 1.5 million in Sydney, that's what you get for your money. Whereas down in Melbourne, for that same kind of money, you're more likely to get a semi or a townhouse. For the rest of Australia, you generally buy a house. So if you're doing it purely for investment purposes, ideally, if you're buying what the local population can afford, it means there's always buyers, sellers and renters in the market. And so the money's pretty liquid if you ever need to sell or rent it out.
Chris, we're recording this in June 2025. What city are you looking at right now in Australia?
So look, I look at the same one. So the reason I've got so much time on my hands is my business doesn't change. I've done the same thing for 30 years, and ideally I'll do it for another 30 years. So I'm not trying to speculate on the latest, greatest thing, because the economists these days, they can't even agree if interest rates are going up or down, let alone by how much. And so my philosophy on investing, and this is pretty much anywhere in the world, is I avoid the CBD, because there's no limit of supply. You can keep building these massive towers, and not many Australians want to live in a CBD. Whereas when you go 5 or 15 k's from the city, where you get 3-story height limits, so you think the Coogis, the Manleys, the Balmains, places like that, you can't build any more property. That's where young people with good jobs, affluent parents, that's where they want to live. They've got high disposable income, and so that's the thing that pushes property prices. Whereas if you try and find the next area, you might get it right, you might get it wrong, and it might sit around for 10 years doing nothing. So I want slow and steady wins the race.
Chris, you've got a really strong mindset, and you said there 30 years. So that says to me that you got this mindset at a really young age. How did you get that mindset going? What was it that steered you on the right track? And how can young people listening to this get into the mindset that you got into at a really young age? Because a lot of us in our 20s are out there and, having a great time and blowing our incomes and loving our lives. And obviously there's got to be a bit of a balance, because that's what you want to be doing in your 20s. But it sounds to me like you knew exactly where you were going at a young age. How did you do that?
So I was born in 71, so I started investing at 22. I basically worked out that a 3-bedroom house was cheaper than a 1-bedroom unit, because I could rent 2 rooms out to 2 friends and effectively live mortgage free. I then worked out 2 years later how I could use the equity in there to get a free Porsche. I couldn't afford a Porsche on a 3-year lease, but I could afford it on a 25-year mortgage. So I completely understand the idea of when you're young, you want both sides. And so I did. So I worked really, really hard. So I worked a full-time job, and then I studied 5 nights a week at college to be an accountant, and I invested at the same time. But at the same time, because I took action, I could reap the rewards as well. So it wasn't that I had to sacrifice everything. I basically took the profits out as I went. So the main thing is 30 years ago, there was no books, there was no seminars, there's no TV programs, there's no information whatsoever. I'm not a great accountant, but I think in numbers. And it was the basic economics of a 1-bedroom unit. This is how much it would cost me, and that would be a fortune, and I couldn't afford to go to the pub. Whereas if some way I could get a mortgage for a much bigger house that was more than my wages, then if I rented 2 rooms, I could live for free. So it was that basic mathematics. And rather than listening to my parents and society, I just create things in basic numbers, and that told me to do the opposite of what everyone else did. So I bought a £100,000 place for 80,000. I was only earning 10 grand a year. So I basically made 2 years' salary overnight. And I thought, this has got to be easier than working 40 hours a week. So the problem is these days there's too much information. There's 1,000 books over there. There's the block on TV. There's all these other shows, all these conflicting people telling you to do different things. So most people get confused and do nothing. Whereas the big thing is do something, learn from your mistakes. You're never going to know everything. And as long as you're doing something, you've got a chance of getting somewhere.
Chris, I want to ask you, how do you simplify complex property strategies for people who aren't financially savvy? Like somebody who wants to get in the market but is really unsure on how to break those numbers down.
So when I wrote, so I've written about 4 or 5 books, but the main book I've got is called The Effortless Empire, which people can download on PDF or audio from my website. And I had a co-writer with that. And the guy was in his 60s, and he didn't know anything. He was into English. He knew nothing about the word leverage or mortgages and those kind of things. So every time I mentioned a word like that, he said, what does that mean? So we broke it down into really, really basic English. And so if this kind of old 60-year-old could understand it, and he was from the Blue Mountains, if he could understand it, pretty much anyone can. So even my kids are 15 and 17. I've already got them reading my book and other books as well to try and educate them from an early age. So it doesn't have to be that complex.
Yeah.
And if anything, so I used to come from Deloitte's, and when I told the partner, so I retired at 31 out of Deloitte's, and all of the partners there that earn $1 million plus, they said, oh, what's your strategy? And I told them, and they said, that's too simple, Chris. If it was that simple, everyone would do it. And I said, no, it's too simple for clever people like you, because you're used to doing $1 billion deals and arbitrage and all this kind of stuff that no one understands. You think it's got to be complex, and so you don't do the basic things. But it's the basic things that actually work. Is I just bought and I held on for 30 years. And then when it went up, I just kept repeating.
Yeah.
As simple as that.
Well, we're often told that property's a long game, right? So you can't, if you're investing into it, you're not going to see that instant return, right, Chris? So it's holding on to it. How do you know when to sell? How do you know when to jump out?
So ideally, you never sell.
Okay.
If you buy the right thing, you'd never sell it because it's always going to be worth more money the day after, effectively. And so that's the thing, is it's having the mindset that, look, you don't have to live in it. So it's not your ideal family home that you've got to live in forever. It's a stepping stone.
Yeah.
And sure, if you make a mistake and you find later on that you've got more knowledge and you bought a property that's not going to go up in the next 5 or 10 years, then sure, sometimes you might need to dump it, take the loss and then carry on. But for most people around the world, when they buy their family home or somewhere to live in, they actually do it very, very well because they've got an interest in doing it because they're going to go and live there. It's when people then go and buy investments, they go off to Bali or they go interstate or they go and buy something exotic because they think it's cool. So just have the mindset of buying something for yourself. Whether you move into it or not doesn't really matter, but that generally saves most people from making stupid mistakes.
Okay, so the psychology around property, and you know, if you've made a bad decision and dumping a property that you've made a bad decision on, that can be quite hard for people to do because there is emotion around that. So how do you coach people who have maybe made that decision and then want to dump a property? How do you get them to the point where they can accept that, cut the loss, and then move on?
So I tell them to study accounting because how much emotion has an accountant got?
None.
Yeah.
Exactly. Absolutely zero. So that's why I'm good at what I do. When I got married, I had to learn emotion, and my wife's still teaching me. But for property investing, having no emotion is the best thing in the world. So what I do is I convert everything onto an Excel spreadsheet and have the basic numbers, and the numbers tell you what to do. So again, is if you have $1 million property that's going to rise by 2%, it's easy to see how much money it's going to be worth in 10 years. Whereas if you do the same and you have $1 million property that doubles every 10 years, you're going to say, well, that million's going to be worth 2 million in 10 years' time. So what's the right decision I should make? Well, I need to dump the lemon and buy a better one.
Jack Henderson is someone that we all see on social media, and he basically met with you after a charity auction, paid $1,500 to have a dinner with you in Woolloomooloo. Can you take us back to that dinner? What were the questions that Jack was asking you at the time? Because that $1,500 that he spent clearly worked very well for him. And I'd love to know some of the key points that you identified in him as he was asking you those questions and what he was extracting out of you.
Sure. And this is a classic thing because the parents' generation is you've got to save money, look after the pennies, pennies look after the pounds. So people don't spend money. Whereas Jack had a completely opposite view, is you've got to invest in yourself. So as a 19-year-old, I didn't know who Jack was. I was on a board. I think there was 10 people, like the head of Westpac, some really big CEOs, and for some reason I got picked as well. And people could bid to have an hour with us. Jack said he was 19, so he won the auction with me. He said, look, I'm 19, this is my story. And I said, well, look, you spend all that money, I may as well take you out for lunch. So we went down to Kingsley's at Woolloomooloo and had a 2 or 3 hour lunch. But he asked a lot of these very, very simple questions. Is like, how do you do it? How do you get over your fear? Were you afraid? How do you go about learning? All of these classic kind of things. And again, it's a mindset. So there's lots of property gurus out there. There's a lot of people wealthier than me. But we all have the same mindset. We might invest in different things. So I invest in blue chip property, like Coogie's, Bondi's, Manly type thing. That's what I understand. That's my background, being around professional people in good areas. There's other people that invest in mining towns or 300 grand properties in the middle of nowhere, and they kind of hotspot and try and find the latest thing. That's all fine. But all our mindsets are the same. We spend a lot of time educating ourselves, learning from other people, delegating the tasks out. So we've got teams of people from mortgage brokers, accountants, all of those kind of people. But a lot of this stuff you don't need a lot of money to do. Most of the information's in books. So you can go to the library for free, go and get 50 books, read a book a week. These days with AI, you can kind of summarize those books for free as well. As I said, I've got my kids doing it. And after a while, all the books are pretty much the same. So you get the content very, very quickly. But ultimately, it's a mindset, and everything else can be taught.
You're not an emotional person, but I would love to know, what is the difference between someone like Jack, who has a lunch with you, grabs that information off you and goes away and executes. I'm sure you've met with people before, given them that same direct piece of information and they haven't executed on that. What is the difference in that type of person that is able to have a mentor around them, grab that piece of information and then run with it versus those who don't?
Yeah, and look, 95 or 99% of people don't do it. And it's whether it's wealth or anything else.
Why is that?
And it's generally down to people's emotions. So my emotion when I was young, and my brother and sister, we obviously had the same parents, we had the same background, we had the same ability to go and do stuff, and we've all done different things for whatever reason. My motivation was I hated being told what to do. And so I wanted to make myself wealthy, so no, I wouldn't have a boss telling me what to do all the time. I also had a motivation for wanting material things in life, like living in a nice house. Ultimately, my ultimate money was to do what I want, with whom I want, when I want, within reason. So for someone like Jack came, his parents were, I think he lived in Mount Druitt or something like that. I've met his parents very, very nice, strong family. He really pushed to get those material things and he had a strong drive. So even at 19, I think he was working in the mines or on big machines and earning maybe 100, 150 grand. So he was motivated anyway. And he was just reinvesting that. Most people don't have a big enough reason, because to change whatever you want to do, whether you're losing weight or you're trying to get fit or you're trying to get wealthy, it takes change, and that change is uncomfortable and it feels risky and you feel vulnerable and stuff like that. So unless you've got a driving power of either something positive that you're going towards, or you're fighting negativity that you don't want the same background as your parents, like a lot of the other speakers, they had really poor backgrounds, and that motivated them to have more choices than the parents did. So sometimes especially with property, if you get yourself into debt, it's almost that forced savings that you're forced to pay the mortgage. Whereas if you're trying to save money, you've never got that same motivation, because if you don't save that month, it doesn't matter. Whereas if you've got a mortgage, you have to. And I'm deep in debt. My mortgages are now maybe $12, $13 million. So I've been in debt since I was 22. And that debt has given me the motivation that I've got to pay the bills, and that motivates me from being lazy, which I naturally am.
Yeah, right. So that's interesting. You're talking about debt as a positive influence when we're often told that debt is a really bad thing to have. How do you flip that switch? How do you make the debt work for you rather than you working for it?
Yeah. So say you've got $100,000 in the bank.
Yep.
Most people from my parents' generation would say that's really good, but you're going to earn $2,000 or $3,000 off that, and then you're going to pay tax. You're left with $1,000 or $2,000. Whereas as a first home buyer, you could buy $1 million property by putting 50 grand down as stamp duty, or you even get free stamp duty these days, putting 50 or 100 grand deposit down. If that $1 million rises by 10%, you've made 100 grand. You've doubled your money, and you're not paying tax on it because you haven't sold the property. That's the benefit of leverage. And so if you work in your job and you think most people maybe earn 50, 100, 150 grand, and then you pay tax on that, you lose a third of that, how many people actually can save $100,000 a year? You never can. And so that's the benefit of property. And so if you are then making 50 or 100 grand a year from your property, then you think, well, why don't I have two properties? Because then I'm making 100 or 200 grand a year.
Chris, we spoke a lot about you being Jack's mentor, but who was your mentor?
So I've had a range of people. A lot of it came from books and things like that. And when I used to be on Sky, they used to say, people would call in and say, who should I learn from? And I say, learn from anyone. And learn from someone that's just been to jail. And they say, why would you do that? Well, if you learn what the dodgy people do and how they rip people off, you get to learn how not to get ripped off yourself. So one of the people I learned from in the early days, ASIC chased him, and he was the renowned dodgy person in real estate. I won't mention any names just in case he's still alive and he sues me. But you can learn from all these people. And the best thing I learned from this guy was to get an independent valuation. So wherever you buy in the world, if you go and pay a completely third party, and you can pay them $500 or $600 to value the property to say, on a bad day, what's it worth? And that almost guarantees you're never going to get ripped off on property, because they know the local market. They've got to do their due diligence. They're an expert in their field. that stops you from getting ripped off. And so that's why I say learn from everyone.
Yeah. Chris, I feel like the property market is never ending. It's continuously booming, especially here in Sydney. People are finding it really difficult to even break into the market. What advice would you give someone who maybe doesn't have a lot of cash up front to get in?
Sure. If there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah.
And so you can sit on your backsides and you can blame everyone else. And I understand that not everyone's had the same background, and I came from a loving family that was supportive and obviously had a bit of money and stuff. But again, is the Jacks and all the other people out there show that if you've got a will, then there is always a way. So I've had multiple jobs. I worked twice as hard in my 20s, but then from 30s onwards, I've had a pretty relaxed kind of life. These days, like the cheapest property we bought in our buyer's agency last year was in Glebe, $550,000 for a one-bedroom unit that was getting about 4.5 or 5% yield. So $550 in Sydney to still be in a good suburb, in a nice block of 4 renovated property, that's still quality. And if you can't afford that, even if you've got 300 or 400, or we actually had a 20-year-old or 22-year-old guy come and work for us for a while. He could only afford a 350 grand mortgage. He got together with his cousin who had just come out of the army that could only afford 350 as well. Together they bought a one-bedder in Vaucluse for 700 grand. In COVID, when no one else was buying and everyone else was skeptical, but they had the Jack Henderson kind of will to survive and to achieve something. That property is now probably worth $1 million.
Wow.
They refinanced, then he bought a one-bedder, I think, in Mosman or somewhere like that. So that's the thing is, you're a part-time student, you can only afford 300 or 400 grand, get together with someone else, and it's better to give half of a decent property than a whole crappy property. So anyone can do it.
Chris, you're hyper-focused on property. What are your thoughts on Bitcoin?
Don't touch it. And look, one of my friends has literally sold his whole life, and if his wife would let him, he would sell the family home to buy crypto. And he loves it. He's making a fortune. I just don't like the ups and downs. So even though I'm millions of dollars in debt, and effectively in some people's minds I'm a gambler, I'm trying to bet on almost sure things. And the government's behind property, the banks are behind property, the councils are behind property. They almost can't afford for property to drop in value much. Whereas with the stuff like crypto or even shares in general for me, I've just got no interest in learning about it. I don't like the ups and downs. I don't like that emotion. I haven't got any hair anyway. I can't afford to lose any more. So it's just not my gig. But if it's your gig, then good on you, and that's your thing.
Yeah.
So I think part of it is do what you love and what you enjoy, because then for me, I can talk about this stuff. You could have recorded me at 3 a.m. and I might be slurring, but I'll be saying the same stuff because I love it and I've said it a million times and it's my passion.
Yeah, I think the lesson there is as long as you are understanding what you're investing in, then you're never going to have a problem. It feels like property is what you know and love, and you've invested your time and your money into that, and that's given you your success. Chris, before we let you go, we like to ask all of our guests if they would like to share a item with us. Is there something significant that you have? Maybe it's in the space with you now. It doesn't have to be with you, but we'd love to hear what it is.
I have, and let me just pull it up on my phone. A lot of people on their phones, they have their wife and their kids' pictures. No one's ever asked me for that. So I've got a picture here of about a dozen of my cars. So I had 14 properties and I bought 14 cars.
Wow.
Including one of them here, which was a street legal tank that I drive around the eastern suburbs.
That's awesome.
I've got a Coles and Woolies and stuff like that in it. And just like property, it brings... Obviously, my wife and kids give me pleasure as well, but the cars give me pleasure no matter what's going on in the world.
Well, I'll tell you what,
them.
in 2025, that tank might be necessary.
Exactly. Well, it was actually at the Westfield stabbing before most of the cop cars got there. I got the call from my daughter, and I was up there in about 6 minutes. My latest purchase, and a lot of these purchases now, they're not expensive. So I went from the Lamborghinis and the Porsches and the Ferraris. My latest purchase last month was a 10 grand tuk-tuk. And it's just getting resprayed. and it's a 7-seater. We're going to do some pub crawls in it with some mates. And so again, these days, it's not about money. Like I live around Double Bay, Darling Point, where everyone's got $1 million McLaren or Ferrari or whatever. I don't care about that stuff anymore.
Yeah.
It's the pleasure. The tank's 60 grand, the tuk-tuk's 10 grand.
Yeah.
You can have lots of pleasure. It's not about a money thing. It's about a pleasure and living your life kind of thing.
Chris, if someone's made it this far into the episode, they are a super fan of you, what would you want to say to that person that is either listening or watching this episode that's made it this far into the episode?
Sure. The main thing is you're never going to know everything, and I don't know everything about property. So don't wait till you know everything, but try and get a base information to know roughly 80% of what's going on. The best tip is get an independent valuation before you buy anything. But the main thing is do something. It's like the Nike ad. If you don't do anything and you wait for the perfect time never comes around. Do something. Even if you make the biggest mistake in the world, at least you're learning and you're moving forward. And that's the thing is anyone that bought anything 10 years ago, 99.9% of the time would have made some money. So you've got to make the most of it. And basically a wage is never going to get you rich.
Chris, we really appreciate your time today, mate. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.